Well, bound up with our love for our neighbour is, of course, love for God, and following what you say about the meaning of love, this should also be the giving of our whole selves. And in fact, Jesus Christ speaks of loving the Lord your God with the whole of your heart and your mind and your soul and your strength. But there has been a dispute in Christian theology over the years about whether this love for God ought to include desire for God, any kind of longing to be completed by God. Because some have suggested that the purest kind of love is just self-sacrifice and self-denial without any hope of being fulfilled or building up the self. And using two Greek words for love, it's sometimes said that our love should be completely agape, self-giving, and not eros, or self-fulfilling. And in love for others as well, some thinkers have said that to allow the love of God to flow through us means that we're not to be enriched in any other way by relation with the other person, to have any desires that are satisfied. Eros love, they say, is not really spiritual love. Now, I should say that I don't actually agree with that myself, but I'd like to hear you speak about what an Islamic view of love would say about eros, or desire. Would I be right in thinking that, and I'm thinking about your book, Love in the Holy Quran, that you see longing, desire, seeking, yearning as true stages in love?
Well, all of this, of course, is another of those confusions set about by Aristotle. And it all comes back to the Nicomachean Ethics, where Aristotle puts desire along with perception and reason. Now, in fact, the problem is this term desire. Now, we have an exact term in Arabic. And the term, of course, is irada. And irada has that double meaning of desire and will. But the problem essentially is, if I may, and we haven't talked about this before, but if I may, I talk about it
Well,
now.
this is a good time to do it, I think.
So essentially, desire, as we have imbibed it from Aristotle, not Plato, comprises of two subjective elements, and they are, and also two objective elements. The two subjective elements are, of course, the two subjectivities of human beings. So who is it that loves? Is it the ego with the body that has a physical part of desire, or is it the pure soul? If you think of Plato's Phaedrus, you'll think of the white horse and the bad horse, the charioteer. But the problem is, as we know it, as we're discussing, when we talk about desire, we're talking about two separate things. One of them is sentiment, and the other is will. Now, I'm going to come back to the two commandments to prove that this is actually confusion. Because when Jesus says, you will love the Lord your God with all your will and with all your soul, he has delineated two separate elements. One of them, of course, is the soul and therefore sentiment, and the other is the will. When we say desire, we have a conflation of those two terms. So, we have a conflation, as it were, going out, and a conflation in the subject. Now, with regards, obviously the highest kind of love is altruistic love, a love that is completely without ego. Well, the ego has completely been, as it were, vanquished by the pure soul, and that person has become, in Quranic terms, we have three different souls that are clearly mentioned. One of them is the nafs al-ammara bis-su, which literally means the soul or the ego that commands on to evil. That is the ego and that is always about me, that is, as St. Paul would talk about in Corinthians, allude to, that is puffed up, that is always, fills its own inner space with itself and what it wants. Then we have the conscience, what we call the conscience, and that is an-nafs al-lawama. Literally means the soul that blames. But once we got beyond that opposition, once, as it were, the bad horse has been broken, we have the soul that is at peace, an-nafs al-mutma'inna. Now, so obviously the highest kind of love would be from the soul that is at peace. There's a verse in the Quran, the last verses of the 89th surah of the Quran, I just quote them in Arabic a little bit because they're very beautiful. يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. Go back to your Lord, your soul that is peace, and enter paradise. So obviously that's the highest kind. Now, that is with very saintly people. With most people, when they love something, even when they love God, there is always a mixed batch of motives. So the question essentially becomes, what motives does God accept for your worship? Worship in the direct sense of prayer and that kind of worship, or worship in the sense of regarding others as a field, an object of your worship by treating them in a loving way. So the motives are basically three: fear, and therefore will, sentiment, and therefore pure love, and knowledge. God accepts those three, even if they are mixed motives. So the question of knowing what motives are, and this is one of the most important questions in religion, knowing what motives are at play is a complicated one and I can explain some things, but no one will understand what I'm saying until they've spent enough time in silence and in solitude and fasting, until they can watch their own thoughts. And of course, Dr. Milner, you both will have done this enough. Once you understand that your own thoughts are, as it were, something extraneous to your real self, then you will be able to know, you'll begin to have some inclination of what psychic elements are at play in you and what each one of them wants. So, in that sense, the word desire is useful because it covers more than one psychic motive that is acceptable.
And this is acceptable to God. God doesn't say, well, your love isn't pure because it's not just altruistic. God accepts this element of desire, of wanting to be fulfilled, of wanting to be satisfied by the other. This is acceptable.
If it has some, you see,
as long as it isn't, as it were, simply egotistic.
Exactly.
And simply self-centered, as long as it's directed towards the other, and allowing them perhaps to make their contribution to what you are. The kind of person who says, I can do everything for you, but you can do nothing for me, you can't make any contribution to me, you can't help to fulfill my desire. This is a very cold kind of love, isn't it? So it's partly allowing the other to be themselves, to make their contribution to the relationship. Desire is part of that too, isn't it?
Yes, and well, it seems to me there are two separate things. One of them is, of course, if you just think you're giving to the other, and the other has nothing to give to you, well, that's not love, because love comes from humility. And therefore you've already decided that you're great, and the other person is worth nothing at all, and all they'll be is just simple recipients of your superior love.
Yeah.
So, of course, and that, of course, this is the whole question of the devil and the fall. Now, the devil in Islamic sort of theology worshipped God, I don't know, part of the earth. And yet he was full of pride. He refused to bow to Adam. Now, a love that is full of pride is essentially a love that is full of oneself. That is essentially a love of oneself. A love without humility, as St. Paul so eloquently said in Corinthians 2 Corinthians 13, is sorry, clashing of cymbals. Exactly.
Yes, yes.
So that's not much use at all. And the problem is, whenever we do something, and this is shaitani tricks, satanic tricks 101, is whenever somebody does something good, and you do something good, an act of good, then devil's right there and say, right, what a great chap you are. You've just done something good. What a loving chap you are. And so you actually wind up, unless you do it with some humility, as worse than before the deed that you did. Because now you have pride, and spiritual pride. Of course, spiritual pride ruins everything.
Well, we've been having such a good conversation about this, and I've been rather leaving out Dr. Dowell on my left, and I would like to hear him talk about this question of desire, because the mystical writers that you've been studying, and including women mystics, have quite a lot to say about love as desire in a pure sense. So could you say something about that, Dr. Dahl?
Yeah, thank you. There is a book that Ibn Qayyim wrote called The Garden of Lovers, and the excursion of those who yearn. And for him, at least, there is the desire what he called the one love. So it's the desire of the lover, the human lover, vis-a-vis the divine. But the text that I'm more interested in is the question of desire comes, at least quite clearly, in Ibn Arabi's Fusus. The last one is concerned with the Prophet, the Prophet Muhammad, the seal of the Prophet. And he takes there hadith about, the hadith goes this way: I have been made to love three things: women, perfume, and prayer. And it is there that he pays attention to desire, right? For mystics, it's quite clear for them that the desire instilled in them is the desire of the mystical part, in the sense that the desire of the one, the desire of God. So the difficulty, as you and I was talking about, is it possible to think of desire on the other side? Is there a divine desire for?
Right. So you're
the
turning it
human
round the
love?
other way. You're
Yes.
saying there's a lot about
Yeah.
our desire for
Yeah.
God, which God allows and accepts as we've been hearing.
We've been
but
hearing.
you're saying, well, there are these hints of God's desire for us, a yearning for human beings.
And
That's a very startling and adventurous thought, isn't it?
But it is for most who will see in that possibility
Yeah.
a need of the divine of his creatures. That at least will remain a very controversial point. And it seems to me that Ibn Arabi won't take the risk to suggest that God have the desire of those who are close to him and would like to, like he said here, an intensive desire for the loved ones, right? So it's possible. I mean, when you see the women mystics, they are more on, one might say, on the orthodox ground, right? For them, the desire that we're talking about is desire of intimacy, the desire of closeness, and somehow the desire of to be the inmost guest of the divine. Right? It's that aspect that I find to be a little more striking when it comes to
Yes.
women.